Welcome to the Kratom Advocacy Podcast. My name is Lawrence, and today we're sitting with Mac Haddow, who is a senior research fellow at the American Kratom Association and a titan of the Kratom industry and community. Welcome to our show today, Mr. Haddow.
Thank you, Lawrence. I'm glad to be with you.
Excellent. All right, so we'll get started. I'll blow you up on the screen here. And can you give us some background to your public policy career, so to speak? What got you started? Where did you cut your teeth, etc.?
So I first got involved in the political world by running Orrin Hatch's campaign for the United States Senate when he first ran back in 1976. I was a college student at the time. His parents, when I was growing up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, were like second parents to my brothers and I. And when I went to school and heard he was running for the Senate, I called him up and asked him if I could help. And I ended up being his campaign manager and served on his staff for a while, served in the Utah legislature as a member of the House of Representatives. And while there, I had been working with the Reagan campaign in 1980. And after he won, they invited me to come back, and I served as the chief of staff at the Department of Health and Human Services for 5 years and got a firsthand look at the FDA's penchant for going after dietary and botanical supplements. Following my career there at HHS, I ended up doing lobbying work, principally in the FDA arena, and working with dietary and botanical supplements. And on August the 30th of 2016, the then president of the American Kratom Association called me and asked me if I could help with the Federal Register notice that had been published that day that would have required the scheduling of kratom under the emergency powers section of the Controlled Substances Act. I told her candidly that at the time that it was a fool's errand, that the DEA had never withdrawn a scheduling recommendation submitted by the FDA, particularly under the emergency powers section, and that the best that they could do is work during the intervening 2 years where the emergency scheduling would be in effect. That required at the end of that 2 years, the FDA to produce what's called an 8-factor analysis for permanent scheduling. And they accepted those terms. What I underestimated was the strength of the Kratom advocacy community. When we first started working on in a 30-day window, which was all that's allowed with no public comment period under the provisions of the Controlled Substances Act, we secured the signatures of 51 members of the House of Representatives, 25 Democrats, 26 Republicans, largely because of the outpouring of support by the Kratom advocacy community. 13 members of the United States Senate signed letters, and there were 146,000 petition signers on the White House's platform called We the People, all of whom called for a removal of this proposed ban. And that, of course, led to the unprecedented withdrawal of the recommendation for scheduling by the Drug Enforcement Administration.
What year was this? Sorry to interrupt.
2016. And it was an amazing event because, as I say, not only unprecedented, but even a week before the end of the 30-day period, the DEA was publicly saying that it was a formality, that the scheduling would actually take place. And it was just a ticker on the clock to get it done. But they underestimated, as I initially did, the strength of this community. And more importantly, I think they underestimated the levels at which the FDA would go to mislead the American public about the purported dangers of kratom, which were wrong, and their claim that kratom was highly addictive, which was also wrong. And that, I think, unfolded as the DEA, both on that scheduling recommendation and then subsequently a year later, when the FDA submitted their full 8-factor analysis, the Assistant Secretary for Health, then Dr. Brett Giroir, who is the responsible official under the Controlled Substances Act to determine whether or not a recommendation is submitted to the DEA, formally withdrew the recommendation that the FDA had made. And he castigated the FDA for what he characterized publicly as embarrassingly poor evidence and data. And more importantly, he said that if you ban Kratom, you will force people that are using Kratom to alleviate acute and chronic pain and to stay off of opioids onto far more dangerous and potentially deadly substances. And I think that
I'm
goes to,
sorry, may I interrupt for a moment? I
sure.
wanted to get your opinion on this directly because I was reading an article in some newspaper earlier, and it said, well, proponents of kratom use for substance abuse disorder, they're not actually correct because the amount of opiate deaths is going up, up, up. If kratom were really such a big influence, then we would see these numbers going down, and we would see more people attributing a turnaround in their lives officially to kratom. What do you say to that?
Well, the scourge of opioid overdose deaths in America is a national crisis. And the fact that the FDA has been unwilling to acknowledge the benefits that kratom provides, far different, by the way, than the National Institute on Drug Abuse, where Dr. Nora Volkow maintains that kratom is potentially a very valuable harm reduction tool. And she looks at and has cited the Johns Hopkins survey of people that are addicted to opioids using kratom to wean off of them, where they found that 87% of the 3,000 subjects that they actually reviewed, 87% reported a reduction in the withdrawal symptoms from the opioid, and that 35% replaced the opioid with kratom to manage their acute and chronic pain. So, kratom is not the silver bullet for every problem. But it is, and has been demonstrated with scientific evidence and data, it is a tool that can be used by people that struggle with these addictions, and it can be a lifesaver. And it has been testified to numerous times by people that experienced it, who credit kratom with saving their lives. And I think the sad part of this is the FDA has stood in the way of people having a better understanding of the potential value that kratom has. And the medical community has been duped by the FDA. And that's why you have this resistance to kratom being used in this fashion.
All right. Many advocates lament the loss of Susan Ash, how her reputation was tarnished. Could you comment on that and what happened?
Susan Ash was a remarkable advocate, has a powerful story about her own personal use with kratom. I enjoyed the opportunity of working with her. The decision about Susan Ash's separation from the AK was a personal one with her, and it was a matter that was dealt with by the board of directors, the governing body of the American Kratom Association. And I think that she's free to discuss it in any way she chooses. I don't think it's my place to make any comment about this because it's a matter really of governance between the board of directors and her.
All right. You mentioned earlier the strength of the kratom community, and I agree. I asked you the year, and you said 2016. Some of the vendors I've spoken with have remarked that about that time the culture was very unified. However, over time, I've heard that this has become less and less the case, particularly surrounding the debate between whole leaf kratom and 7-OH. It seems as though the community has kind of, to me as an outsider, I don't take kratom, I'm not part of the industry, it seems fractured. It seems right now that there are proponents of the complete legality of 7-OH, and it seems to me that there are people who fear that conflating 7-OH with kratom, as they put it, will imperil the legality of kratom itself. Where do you stand on this?
So first, the community itself is not as fractured as some would think, or that some would like it to be or purport it to be. The fact is that there is naturally going to be fatigue in an advocacy community when you start in 2016 and you're literally have your back to the wall thinking that kratom was going to be banned, and we successfully fought that ban and won. We did it again in 2018. We did it again in 2021 when the FDA went to the UN Commission on Narcotic Drugs, and they were recommending scheduling it at an international level. It took 80,000 kratom consumers in the United States that we helped to organize and to communicate to the Expert Committee on Drug Dependence, which was the reviewing body at the UN Commission on Narcotic Drugs, on that recommendation. The threat was real because there is a lower standard for scheduling at the international level. And as a treaty partner, the United States would have been obligated to commence scheduling procedures had they adopted a recommendation for scheduling internationally. The UN Commission on Narcotic Drugs heard the Kratom community loud and clear. They heard the scientists, and they unanimously concluded that Kratom was not a candidate for scheduling. Now, the reason I say that is that you have those battles that go on. And what happened, I believe, in the Kratom community is that there's fatigue because we win and because we fight back. We fought back and have won on every state ban since Rhode Island enacted their ban in 2017, all at the behest of the FDA with their disinformation campaign. So you keep winning, you keep coming back to the well, and you say, we need help again. We're going through this in Virginia right now, where we need to have Kratom advocates rally. And I see the fatigue. I see people. So that's one element. It's just, people get tired and, they get a little fat and sassy about the fact that we win all the time. The second issue has nothing to do with 7-OH. That is a new issue on the horizon that's just has emerged. It really was the difference in views between a Kratom pure plant product and a Kratom extract. And the truth of the matter is that there is a significant misunderstanding cultivated by those who advocate only for Kratom pure leaf plant material to be used as products. The American Kratom Association's commitment is to allow for the Kratom community, the consumers, to have the advantage of a properly regulated, meaning that it's safely manufactured, properly labeled, and certainly not available to children. That the whole purpose of this is to allow for innovation. If we stifle innovation in the product development of products, you can see the ultimate outcome. And those that have a self-interest in only wanting one product form available are very loud voices. I hear them, but that doesn't make them right. And what we ought to do, and we have advocated for at the American Kratom Association, is to let science dictate this. And here's the fundamental problem. We either want Kratom to be a drug, and we don't. We think that the FDA would then shut everybody down. You cannot treat Kratom as a drug if you want to say, oh, well, that Kratom product is not something that's appropriate for sale just because it's your opinion. If you have science behind it, absolutely, I agree. We need to treat Kratom as a dietary botanical supplement.
Would you treat 7-OH as a drug?
I'll get to 7-OH in a minute. But again, if we want to focus on 7-OH, it's a huge mistake because it has nothing to do with 7-OH in terms of the division in the community about what our complaints are. And I'll get to 7-OH because I think it's a unique and emerging issue. But the truth is that extract products are the prevailing and common products. If they're properly extracted, they're fine. They're safe. And consumers prefer them because they eliminate all microbial contaminants along the way. But make no mistake, there are people in the Kratom industry today who want to demonize all extracts, and they want them all off the shelf. And I get that. They're wrong because I can't defend Kratom being available in the marketplace and say it's only going to be Kratom pure leaf powder. If I do that, then I ignore what I just suggested to you is what the proper statutory construction under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act is, and the way the FDA should be treating Kratom, which says that a product manufacturer that has a reasonable basis for the safety of their product that they introduce into the marketplace under the conditions of use. That means labeling. So 7-OH. 7-OH is a new issue that has arisen here in the last couple of years. We started to look at it in 2019 when we were formulating the Kratom Consumer Protection Act model legislation that we wanted states to adopt. And in numerous discussions with scientists, the prevailing view was that 7-OH as a metabolite, at the time people thought maybe it was an alkaloid constituent of the Kratom plant. It is not. We now know that 7-OH is actually derivative of the drying process that starts after the leaf is plucked and harvested and starts to degrade. And we also know that 7-OH is metabolized after consumption. So we have to look at these issues is at what level does 7-OH become a dangerous substance? So we determined that the right standard would be that no 7-OH product should be available on the marketplace that exceeded 2% of the overall fraction of the alkaloids in the kratom plant, not to exceed. And we, because the view was that in
Dry weight or total alkaloid content? I'm sorry, I'm
total
just
total alkaloids. That was the position that was taken by the scientists at the time, because the idea was that you could never get above 2% of the overall fraction of the alkaloids without synthesizing 7-OH. So that was the view at the time. We've since evolved on this view for two reasons, and this is where a significant conflict now exists. Should you allow synthesized 7-OH products on the market that are artificially enhanced? You should not. Those are drugs, and they should be treated as a drug because they're no longer the natural plant. Now, at what level is 7-OH dangerous that is naturally occurring, meaning that it's in the drying process along the way and it's not synthesized? This is where the debate has come in, and it's a fascinating debate, by the way, and I hear on all sides where it is. Since we don't have any data that shows that there is a toxic level of 7-OH that causes harm, then the next standard that we need to look at closely is what is the evidence in terms of data that's available on adverse events, serious or otherwise, for the consumption of 7-OH products. Now, it's my understanding that the 7-OH products that have been on the marketplace that are the subject of controversy have been on the market for 2 years. And the conundrum for us is that we have yet to identify any serious adverse event that's directly associated with the consumption of a 7-OH product. That means that we simply got to go back to the drawing board and look at what levels are 7-OH naturally present in the plant, and at what point did they become synthesized and therefore potentially dangerous. The interesting debate that's going on now is that there are people who have an opinion. An opinion is that, 7-OH shouldn't be artificially in any way enhanced, whether it's by synthesization or not. And I understand and fully embrace that concern. But remember, the FDA's position is, their opinion, not based on science, is that no kratom should be sold. None. You look at the FDA kratom website today, and it says that all kratom products are adulterated. So let's fall into the trap of the FDA. Let's say, okay, you can now let your opinion prevail. I choose not to do so. I think that we need to have good science that backs up. And what I like is the construct in the federal statute that says a manufacturer has the duty and obligation to determine a reasonable basis for the safety of their product based on the conditions of use. So if there is a 7-OH product that is available on the marketplace that's naturally formed, not synthesized, and if they label it properly, then I'm having a hard time understanding what the argument here is, as long as, and this is something, my personal opinion, but I don't believe opinion should be the thing that controls things, science should, is that they're not really kratom if they're doing that, because they're now taking a metabolite of the kratom, isolating it, and they're creating a problem. And remember, there's another pitfall here that we need to be cognizant of. In 2019.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt you. People I've read riposte to that, I guess, would be, well, then you would say that Delta 8 isn't cannabis. You're saying that, 7-OH isn't kratom. Oh, so Delta 8 isn't cannabis. Delta 10 isn't cannabis. Like, some people would say that they are, reasonably so. How would you split those hairs? That's not necessarily my opinion. That's just a common response I've seen on various subreddits.
Well, first off, I wouldn't look to subreddits for the basis for any conclusion on anything, because people just are freely expressing their viewpoints. Get it? They're expressing their opinions. They're entitled to do so. I think we look at the science. And the issue, as I understand it, with Delta 8 and Delta 9 cannabinoids are synthetically derived. They're not naturally occurring. And that's the distinction I was trying to make about 7-OH and whether it's derivative of a natural process as opposed to a synthesized process. That's a clear, bright line that we can distinguish on. But if we choose to go down the path, and some are, that we want to say, okay, we're going to limit 7-OH, then think about the complexity of what we've just embraced. We now know that there are 4 other subalkaloids of kratom that, if they're isolated and synthesized, create the same problem. So my view is that we need to put and we're changing the model KCPA to do this. we limit synthesized alkaloids of the kratom plant. You cannot artificially synthesize and enhance the power of them. If you don't do that, then we're going to have a 7-OH provision. You're going to have a speciosilitine provision. I mean, there are 4 or 5 alkaloids currently identified, and there will be more coming. We didn't know about these subalkaloids 2 years ago. And in 2 years, there may be 12, 14, or 15. And none of this makes any sense for any legislator that's sitting there and saying, I want to embrace this, but what does this mean when you've got all these provisions with alkaloids I can't even pronounce? And it weighs down the value of the actual legislative framework that we're trying to advocate for. Look what happened in Florida yesterday. Governor DeSantis vetoed the hemp bill, which was going to control Delta 8 and Delta 9. And he did so because the regulatory structure was so onerous that it was going to unfairly put people out of business. And he thought that it had to be reconstructed. That's the problem from a legislative standpoint that we have to embrace when we're looking for advocating for the Kratom Consumer Protection Act. We need to have a broad, simple, understandable provision, which is that you limit all synthesization of these.
In regards to that, can you comment on AB? I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this right. I'm new to this. AB 2365, the California bill. You mentioned that I think you mentioned that you oppose it. Do you have an issue with that? That's regarding regulation of the amount of 7-OH. And I think you mentioned you oppose it.
Well, the American Kratom Association has been working with the Global Kratom Coalition and the Botanic Tonics people who drafted that bill, and we have made some progress. It's not there yet. So in its current form, as it is constructed, the American Kratom Association finds this bill to impose a regulatory burden that is unmanageable. It will put businesses, small and medium-sized businesses, out of business, and it limits the product formulations that are otherwise legitimate that a company has the right to introduce using the federal standard that I just referenced. So we have some problems with the bill. We're hoping that the sponsor, and I've been told directly by the Global Kratom Coalition and Botanic Tonics founder, J.W. Ross, that it's now in the hands of Assemblymember Haney. So we're going to reach out to him directly, and we hope that we can prevail on him to make some amendments to the legislation.
Okay. How transparent is the AK with their donations and funding?
The American Kratom Association is a qualified IRS 501c4 organization that meets with and complies with all applicable regulations for transparency. Anyone can request a 990, which is the tax return for it. They're welcome to do so. We also are governed by a board that oversees the management. There is an independent audit done of all of the financial transactions by the board. That's a policy adopted by the board of directors. And anyone that seeks to get the IRS form, they can do it. Now, full transparency that some define would violate the actual premise of the IRS protections for 501c4 organizations who protect the donor list. So it obviously is going to be a barrier to anyone accessing who gives money to any 501c4 anywhere in the country, including the American Kratom Association. So that's not going to happen. There are people who like to criticize the AK and say, oh, well, they're not just opening up their books to everyone. I would make 2 points on that. First is I would look to people to have standing. And a critic, and you and I both know who I'm talking about, hasn't given to the AKA. So I'm sorry, I have a little bit of trouble with someone that says, oh, we want to see where all the money's being spent. Well, pony up money and show that you're committed to it first, and then maybe we can have that discussion. But secondly, and I think this is the more important point, is that everything we do at the American Kratom Association is focused on specific objectives, and they are governed by the board of directors. We set policies. I'm given instructions about how we're going to allocate our resources between the federal Consumer Protection Act. We have a substantial lobbying effort underway there. How we allocate resources to the states. We have 13 states that have passed the KCPA. That's been an expensive, time-consuming proposition. We expect to have a couple more here in the next couple of weeks, fingers crossed. And then we go to the individual states where the FDA has been very aggressive in misleading local law enforcement and local public health authorities. And we have to do the best we can to fight those. And I don't think it makes any sense, none, zero, to be distracted by a single critic or even a small number of critics who want to just chirp into the wind and say, oh, we want to see where the money goes. They don't give the money, and they want to see what Mac Haddow is doing, and they want to criticize me personally. Fine. I have invited those critics multiple times. Let's have a discussion on a Zoom call. I'll take any question from them. They hide from it. They refuse to do it. So frankly, I don't give them any credibility and refuse to do anything more than just make that offer. And when they're willing to show up and they're willing to actually be public with it and not sit in the sidelines and fire unhinged accusations, then maybe we can have a discussion.
Okay. What do you think is your biggest mistake as a policymaker or in your tenure at the AKA? One mistake that you think you made?
Well, actually, there's multiple mistakes we've made. One is that we started off thinking that the right approach here was to, in terms of our model KCPA, which we've had to adapt, was really focused on an opinion that was held with respect to 7-OH, for example, as opposed to good science. And so we're adapting to that. We're making it work. I think the other organizational mistake we might have made is that, I think we did make, is that when we shifted from the advocate base, and we started focusing on where we wanted the AK to be in terms of state legislation, we were too aggressive early on. We spent a lot of money that did bear fruit. But now, if I were looking back on it, we would target our resources much better than we did before. So I think that there's always room for improvement. I think that there are personnel decisions with respect to lobbyists that you hire, that you do the best you can in identifying who the right lobbyists are. And then we find out we made a mistake because that lobbyist didn't do the job that we hired them to do. That happens. But we try to be as nimble as we can. We try to be as responsive as we can, and we learn. And I think that we've learned from past errors and mistakes, and we're stronger for it, and we continue to go forward. Will we make mistakes in the future? Of course, nature of the business that we're in, but we do our best. And I'd say one last thing: we probably haven't connected as well with some of the advocate community along the way. And here's why some of that happened. One of the things that we advocate for is that every business today that's in the Kratom business should adhere to FDA good manufacturing practice regulations. We have a GMP program, and I routinely get calls, and I know this is what's caused a lot of the split in the industry, where they say to me, you're trying to put me out of business. These are small to mid-sized Kratom businesses that are importing Kratom directly. Huge mistake, by the way, for them to do so. Importing Kratom directly, and they're repackaging the powder and they're shipping it out. Do I have a problem with that? I absolutely do. And I tell them, yes, I want to put you out of business unless you are willing to actually submit to and adhere to GMP practices, which is expensive, by the way, good testing methodologies, which is expensive. But if you can just take Kratom powder, repackage it, and send it out, you're not paying any of that. You're undercutting not only the competitive marketplace unfairly, but you are also putting consumers at risk. Because I can tell you, having been there and seen what happens on the ground in the harvesting regions of Indonesia, there's some suspect supply chain issues. And we can't rely upon some farmer in a remote region in Indonesia saying, oh, trust me, my Kratom's clean. I want it tested. And for every one of those, and I get it that we've lost people because of it, every single one of these 6,000 or 7,000 Kratom vendors in the United States that are not complying with the FDA GMP guidelines or adhering to the AKA's GMP guidelines, which are modeled after the FDA's guidelines for manufacturing practices, I want them out of business. No question about it.
Were you working with Coperba at the time in Indonesia, about August 2022?
So Coperbu is an interesting story. We were working with Coperbu as a farmers organization and representative. We had what I believe to be an excellent relationship. And the reason that we don't work with them today is pretty straightforward. First, they aligned themselves with probably some of the harshest critics of the AKA, and they touted it and publicized it. And it was false information. So I don't know. You don't work with people that you cannot trust to at least adhere to a basic sense of honesty. So I called them out on it and told them that their republication of materials that were demonstrably false was not productive. But the more important issue was that the Koperbu group wanted the AKA to sign off on a price floor for kratom to be delivered to the farmers. And my argument back to that was that we believe that the free enterprise system really is the correct modulator of pricing for kratom. And the problem was that you have people in Indonesia that were doing a couple of things that were undermining the legitimate pricing that should be in effect. And Koperbu wasn't willing to focus on those things. It included things like farmers who were mixing kratom with other botanical material, selling it to the United States as kratom material. It was undermining the price. So you would see a dramatic drop in the price that was being sold by those farmers, and Koperbu wasn't willing to do a thing about it. And that was disappointing. The other thing is they want us to sign off and say, oh, we're going to insist that this be done. And they were working, Koperbu were working with the Indonesian officials. I did so in good faith. We actually signed an agreement with a number of American vendors to solidify the supply chain. They didn't include the pricing mechanism that we obviously had a controversy about. Unfortunately, that was mischaracterized by Koperbu's leadership. Johannes is the guy we're talking about, and he went out and said it was something that it was not. He attributed factors to that agreement that were not present, and even General Muldoko disagreed with Johannes on this issue. I was invited to participate in a forum organized by Dr. Muldoko, General Muldoko, in his offices with all of the ministries that in the Indonesian government that were a part of the discussion about kratom. And Johannes wasn't invited to it because of that separation. So I can't account for why the disagreement between the government in Indonesia and Johannes. I don't know, but I can tell you that it wasn't smooth sailing. And we are willing to work with any of the farmers, and we were not willing to let Johannes and Koperbu be the single processor. That's what he advocated for. And I told him that, first off, it was a fool's errand because everyone would undercut him by going through the black market. But more importantly, it would paint a target on him and his Koperbu by the FDA. But if you have a single processor controlling all shipments of kratom out of Indonesia, which is what he proposed, and we opposed doing that, it was a huge mistake because it would shut down the supply chain because FDA could come swooping in and find the one processor that Johannes wanted to be for all kratom shipping out of Indonesia. So it just didn't work. I'm hoping that we can reconstruct that relationship, but we're moving on. We're working with the Indonesian government right now, and we're looking towards an agreement that we're probably going to sign. There are regulations being developed by the Indonesian government that we're cooperating with. We want to be a good partner, but a partner requires trust. And right now, there was no trust that we've been able to see that exists with the Koperbu Group and the American Kratom Association.
But you would talk with them again if they suggested it.
Of course. And they're one of their, I don't want to mistake this, I think he's one of their big supporters is Paul Kemp, whom I have enormous respect for. And I think that there might be an area, and Paul and I've talked about this, but I'll tell you what doesn't work when Johannes decides it's his way or the highway. I'm sorry, that doesn't work. And I don't have to agree with someone 100% of the time and still have discussions, but apparently that's the view he has about it. So that's very unfortunate.
Well, yes, I mean, the perspective is that they're supporting a higher standard of kratom than the AKA is willing to allow, and they're the ones who are.
That's absurd. It's completely ridiculous. He has no basis to say that. Nobody does. We've been advocating every minute I've spent in Indonesia is to try to improve the supply chain. And anyone who suggests that, Johannes, if Paul Kemp says it, if Daniel Torres says it, it's nonsense because they've never had that discussion with me. I have never, ever tried to say we accept lower grade kratom. I've in fact advocated for it to strengthen that supply chain. And the only disagreements we've had, and they can color it any way they choose, was that Johannes and Koperbu wanted to be the single processing unit to ship all kratom out of Indonesia. I objected to that. And secondly, they wanted to set a floor price for the farmers in Kratom, and I objected to that based on free enterprise principles. So what you're hearing, Lawrence, and I want to be clear, they're lying. They're absolutely lying to you if they suggest that the AK wants to have a lower grade of Kratom coming out of Indonesia. There is no support for that notion. It's crazy, but guess what? It self-justifies their moral superiority, right? They want to say, oh, well, the AKA is trying to get the lower standard Kratom out. Prove it. Show me one thing that they can point to where that's been the case. They cannot. And frankly, the fact that you suggest it, you've been told by it, you've been misled. They're flat out lying.
All right. Well, that's interesting.
Can I be more clear?
You may be as clear as you would like.
No, just tell it's a lie. It's not true. But you know what it speaks to is the self-justification by people that really can't operate in the open. It's all got to be in the dark. It's all got to be behind the scenes. And no one has ever, until you just said it, no one's ever said to my face, oh, the AK wants to have a lower grade of Kratom coming into the United States. That's ridiculous. We believe in testing. We have advocated for testing. Look at the good manufacturing program that we put into place, where we require vendors to test from an independent third-party laboratory on the quality of their products.
May I clarify something?
How can anyone sustain the argument that I'm for
Okay.
bad quality Kratom? If you believe that the only product formulation for a Kratom product is pure leaf powder, then you would have a self-interest from a business perspective in restricting Kratom raw materials that can be used for extract products, right? And extraction, by the way, is a very interesting process as long as it follows the FDA guidelines. We have extract products on the marketplace across hundreds, if not thousands of products. And I get it that if you're in the business of selling only pure Kratom powder, that's it, you're going to use every tactic you can to demonize extracts. Look at the marketplace. The marketplace is dominated today by extracts that use proper extraction methodologies approved by the FDA. So the American Kratom Association supports that because consumers want it. Now, the fact that you have a segment of the industry that is dedicated to only have pure leaf powder products, that's self-interest, and that's fine. They can defend that, but they can't lie about things and say, well, we're trying to get lower quality Kratom. If the lower quality Kratom material that they're referencing is extract material, then that's part of the supply chain. We're not saying that it should be sold as powder products. We're suggesting that it should be appropriately utilized and then tested to make sure that the extract products meet standards for FDA extraction methods and that they're quality products when they're actually produced and put into the marketplace.
It's of course possible that I'm also, as an outsider and a recent citizen journalist, that I'm, maybe mischaracterizing something, but that's just the general impression that I get what I said. So yeah,
it's a misimpression, and it's the same. Mm-hmm. It's the same issue that we get into when we talk about Kratom, and people say, I hear this from legislators and from city councilmen. Well, the FDA says Kratom is adulterated and not legal for sale in the United States. They say that. Doesn't mean they're right, but they say it. And if you have someone that repeats a misstatement, the citizen journalist or whatever, then they need to account for it because it's not correct. Just because you have a self-interest in wanting to sell one product form doesn't justify your demonizing another product form, and particularly associating claims that are not true to the American Kratom Association.
Yeah. I'm not saying that I support any of that. It's just all I'm doing is, like, as an observer, taking in what I perceive and then spitting it out. I'm not really trying to attack your perspective or your organization at all.
No, understood. And okay. I'm only suggesting that the source of the misinformation needs to be accountable. That's all. I'm not suggesting it's you. That as you hear it, it's the same nonsense the FDA peddles, and at some point we all have to be accountable for what we're doing.
Okay. It said that 7-OH has powerful analgesic effects. Might this possibly interest the government, the military?
Well, I don't know if it interests the government or the military. I know that my concern is that 7-OH products need to meet the standards of science in terms of their safety. And if a product is naturally derived, a 7-OH product naturally derived, and it hasn't been synthetically escalated, then those products have to stand on their own and determine whether they're safe or not. And that's why the federal standard is so important, that a manufacturer that introduces a 7-OH product for sale in the United States has to have a reasonable basis for the safety of that product under the labeling that they provide. So, if you label your product and it says, okay, here's 7-OH, and 7-OH might be, if you just down, 10 tablets or 10 capsules or whatever it is, then it could be dangerous. That's true for any product that has a limitation based on serving sizes that are safety related. So those standards should apply absolutely to those manufacturers, and they better be able to prove it, because you see the significant number of product liability cases that are emerging across the country just about Kratom. And there certainly will be an accountability in a courtroom if the 7-OH manufacturers are not adhering to the standard that they're required to have a reasonable basis for that safety as it's labeled for use.
Okay. Perhaps the AKA is aware of the fact that using scientific methods, one dose of kratom can be used to produce approximately 10 equivocal doses of 7-OH. 7-OH is less nauseating than regular kratom and more enjoyable, and for these reasons, 7-OH threatens the demand for kratom and the businesses that import and distribute kratom, and the same businesses that fund and back the AKA. What do you say about that?
Well, first off, the companies that are participate in our Kratom Industry Council do so to support what we articulate clearly and unequivocally as our policy position. And it's public and it's out there in our model KCPAs. Those companies don't have any input by saying, I want you to strike that provision. We just don't do that. Now, they're free to walk and not support our advocacy efforts. That's fine. But I think this issue with 7-OH needs a lot more exploration, because what we're learning now about 7-OH products is going to be important as we go forward, but not just 7-OH, because the next one's going to be speciosilitine, and then it's going to be panthenine, and we're going to have any number of alkaloids, if isolated and then enhanced, we need to be prepared for, and the standard has to be clear. One thing I cannot do, and the American Kratom Association cannot do, nor can anyone else, is make up new laws without their going through the legislature. And the current law, I think, has to be adhered to and enforced. And that is the standard that if you do manufacture that product, you put it in the marketplace, you better be able to prove it's safe and under the conditions of use. So now, can I control someone that takes a Kratom product and abuses it and doesn't follow the directions? I cannot. That's true for powder, that's true for extracts, and it's going to be true for 7-OH products and speciosilitine products, or whatever other alkaloid isolate and therefore enhanced synthetically that comes onto the marketplace. The Congress is going to have to enact the Federal Kratom Consumer Protection Act, where the FDA would be required to publish standards, and they could actually put into rulemaking controls on 7-OH and other alkaloid isolated products, and that would be great. But we can't make it up before then. We've got to let the law prevail, and then hopefully we can get the FDA on side to finally. FDA's wall against kratom is going to be the dose finding study that was completed recently that showed that kratom is well tolerated at all dose levels with human participants. Maybe it's going to be the fact that they had to admit before a federal judge under oath that they do not have a basis to determine that kratom is dangerous, which flies in the face of 10 years of disinformation, including specific Federal Register notices that kratom poses an imminent threat to the American public. There's a lot that the FDA has to account for. So hopefully when they get to the right place, we'll be able to have these products that are questionable and hold them accountable in the marketplace.
Okay, before you mentioned limiting 7-OH levels to 2%, what is Christopher McCurdy's opinion about that?
Well, you can ask Chris. I mean, we've discussed it. He's done some research, not yet published, that he's discussed that says that a survey of 350 commercially available kratom products showed that none of them had a level of 7-OH that was above the detectable level of 0.3%. Great. That shows that self-regulation is working. Now, for 7-OH levels that are appropriate, I've heard lots of different proposals. One is that we change it from the 2% of the overall fraction of the alkaloids in the plant itself to a 2% by dry weight. I think this has got to be a scientific determination based on science, not on opinions of what we think. Chris has told me that they know for certain that 7-OH binds more tightly to the mu opioid receptors than metrogyny. It's not a partial ag. And of course, one of the determinations on finding out that is to look at adverse events reports. So we're waiting to see. There haven't been any that I know of, and I don't think Chris knows of it either, based on statements he's made recently. We don't know that yet, but we want to find out. And so I think more close examination of the marketplace of adverse event reports, and I think more science on what the psychoactive properties of 7-OH are, I think is in order, and we ought to be pursuing those aggressively.
Okay. What is your opinion of the Global Kratom Coalition and what they're doing, and how the perspectives of the AKA and the methodologies of the AKA differ?
Well, the Global Kratom Coalition is an industry organization, trade association, and they have the right to exist, free speech rights. We also have the right to disagree with them because we have, I believe, a much broader perspective about the consumer marketplace than a trade organization that limits their focus on products that they want to see eliminated, which reduces competition. And I've not seen enough from the Global Kratom Coalition to make a final determination, but I'm deeply concerned when they advocate for legislation in California, for example, that appears on its face to be intended to limit products, to create registration fees that will put all small and mid-sized kratom manufacturers out of business. They published a list of products that they said were non-compliant with the standards they set. I don't think legislation is the place where you do competition. I think that's the marketplace. And I don't think you load up a regulatory bill with such specific regulations as the California bill has, that was put into place by the Global Kratom Coalition and Botanic Tonics. I don't think that's the place for it. And you'll get the same outcome in most states that you got in Florida with the hemp bill, where Governor DeSantis said, this is too much regulation. It's too much of a burden on small and mid-sized businesses. And so I think that if our goal is to, one, protect consumers and make sure that there is an innovative marketplace that allows for good competition among quality products that are safe, that's what we should be advocating for. So I'm hopeful that we can continue to work on the California bill. I'm hopeful that we can do things together with the Global Kratom Coalition where it makes sense. But I can tell you that anyone that wants to look at us right now, straight up, the AKA has promoted and gotten past 13 Kratom Consumer Protection Acts in the states. In Rhode Island, a banned state right now, the vote was 50-14 on Thursday to pass the KCP out of the House, and we look for action there. I didn't see the Global Kratom Coalition there. I haven't seen them in any of these states other than interfering in one state with what I thought was a mistake at the time, and that was in Oklahoma. But we should coordinate better, and I'm looking forward to that day. But they have a different agenda than the American Kratom Association has, and where we can find areas of cooperation, we're going to work together as best we can. But we're going to maintain our adherence to the principles that we have about what we are trying to do. The KCPAs in the individual states are not replacements for the FDA. It is filling the gap of the failure of the FDA to regulate kratom products. We don't want to create a mini FDA bureaucracy in every state. It will drive costs up. It will make kratom unaffordable for most people, except for certain companies. And I don't think that's the model that we want to follow. So we're hopeful that our model continues to be successful, and I think we will. We've proven it over time, and hopefully we'll get to better cooperation levels with the Global Kratom Coalition.
All right. And when will we get beyond not for human consumption into dosage directions everywhere?
So the not for human consumption is a direct byproduct of the import alert that was a construct adopted by some Indonesian shippers. I think it was a mistake, and I think it's a mistake that continues today, where they label kratom coming into the United States as not for human consumption. They should not do so. I think every kratom raw material brought into the United States ought to be labeled for what it is, and anyone who's doing it differently is a mistake. Now, the fact that they import it into the United States and say it's not for human consumption, they assume the risks that are associated with it, because anybody reasonably knows that kratom is going to be sold to a manufacturer who will then manufacture a product that is intended directly for human consumption. So this charade game And I think that people should look at the case in 2018 in Detroit, where a manufacturer was directly importing Kratom raw materials to the United States, and he was convicted for fraud because he was clearly then producing a Kratom product for human consumption. I think the Sebastian Guthrie case that was just resolved is a good benchmark for people to understand in the Kratom industry that calling it fertilizer or something else is not a good policy. It is what it is. Kratom is a food product that is intended for human consumption, and anyone that's importing it differently than that really shouldn't be doing that.
All right. And what is the AKA looking toward in the future? Things coming up that you're excited about?
Well, I'm hopeful that we're going to get over between now and next year. We'll get to over 20 states that have passed the KCPA. We're really excited about the first state to fall, Rhode Island, with a ban, and hopefully the Senate will see clear to pass that bill. It was a strong statement by the House to pass it 50-14. The governor has worked closely with us in getting a bill that he will sign, which is a big hurdle. The Department of Health in Rhode Island is vehemently opposed to the repeal of this bill. So we've done great work up there. And I think that we'll see once we get one state like that, the others will fall. We're working hard in Wisconsin, in Arkansas, in Indiana. We're gonna in Vermont. We're gonna make sure that we open those marketplaces to safe Kratom products for consumers and not let prohibitions and bans, which are the failed drug policy in the United States for the last 50 years, prevail. We want to upset those. So that's a big goal. And then we want to see the Federal Kratom Consumer Protection Act pass. And our goal from the start was to get enough states to pass the KCPA that the state delegations would put pressure on their congressional delegation to do what the Congress did in 1994, which was to tell the FDA enough with their nonsense about trying to demonize dietary supplements, and they passed the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act. I hope that in 2025, the Congress passes the Federal Kratom Consumer Protection Act. It is my goal. It is a passion of mine, despite the nonsense you might hear from the side about some detractors saying, oh, I don't really want to pass that. That's nonsense. We're going to pass this. I'm ready to retire. I could go into the night right now, but I'm not going to do it till we get the Kratom Consumer Protection Act passed, and then I'll gladly go into the night. This is an important thing for the consumers, Kratom consumers in America.
Mr. Haddow, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I certainly learned a lot, and I wish you luck in your quest for the total legalization of Kratom across the country. Thank you again.
Well, thank you for the opportunity and for the fair way that you handled this. I appreciate it very much.